My mother handed me a strange set of rules for our new house. We moved into our new house just a few weeks ago. Yesterday, though, now it seems so long ago, my mother handed me a strange and tattered list. Her eyes were unfocused, and her movements were shaky. I asked her what was wrong, but she shuffled away without a word. Confused, I began to read. Welcome to your new house. However this was delivered to you, it is vital that you follow each and every rule very carefully, as long as you live here. Only you. Whoever received the letter is bound to the rules and their consequences. Please remember that any writing in strange penmanship is meant to deceive you. Usually these will be crossed out, but if they are not, please cross it out yourself. The rules are as follows. 1. If anything goes wrong in the events of Rule 2 or you don't follow Rule 3, you must go outside. Head to the kitchen and pour sea salt in a circle around you before covering your ears. Once the clock reads 5 o'clock, you can clear away the salt and go back to what you were doing prior. 2. If at night you hear a window creak open and you wake up, you must not show you're awake. Count to 30 in your head and try your best to go back to sleep. If something goes wrong, follow Rule 1. Listen to the voices. I would never lead you astray, right? After an exasperated sigh, I stopped reading and let go of the worn-out paper, watching it drift to a stop, going right past the table I'd intended it land on, and going straight onto the floor. What a joke. Obviously, my mother must have thought it would be hilarious to mess with me like this. I stormed into the living room, where she sat in the recliner watching a Wheel of Fortune rerun on the cable TV. I showed her the list. What even is this? I asked. She stared at me blankly, looking a little confused. I don't know. What is it, hun? I tried to tell her that she'd given it to me just a few minutes before, but she denied it and said she'd been watching TV for the past half an hour. I knew I wouldn't get anywhere with it, so I walked away. On my way upstairs, I heard crying. I rounded the corner and found the source. A girl facing away from me with her hands covering her face. My older sister. I set a hand on her shoulder, asking her what was wrong. She turned around and I found that she was quite obviously not crying, but instead had an eerily calm and happy expression. Something about her face felt off. We sat there staring at each other for a moment before she ran towards the stairs, giggling. I ran after her, but when I reached the stairs, she was gone. I went to ask my mother about it, but she frowned and told me that it was rude to lie. My sister had gone out that morning. Afterwards, she asked if I was feeling all right. I nodded and ran upstairs, passing a note on my sister's door that hadn't been there before. Going out to a party with friends. Be back at 10 p.m. Call if something's wrong. Sarah. I dashed towards the table where I'd dropped the rules and continued reading frantically. 3. Do not, under any circumstances, go outside at night, and if you find yourself outside of the house when night falls, stay out until day. If you don't follow this rule for whatever reason, follow Rule 1. 4. If you see a family member facing away from you in a hallway and crying, stay away. It's not your family member. If you fail to do this, for 3 nights after the incident, you will be hunted down. During this period, none of the protective rules will apply. Nighttime is considered 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. I froze. I wanted to believe this was a joke, but my sister had never been a good actor. If it were fake, she'd have fallen over laughing before she could finish it. Not to mention, how could she vanish into thin air? I checked the clock. 9:31 p.m., half an hour until showtime. I gathered up a kitchen knife and decided I'd rather stay somewhere public, where someone can protect me. Slipping the knife into my pocket, I headed downstairs and grabbed my mother's car keys. I Googled what places might be open at night, but the only results were restaurants, and so I headed to the airport. Yes, to the airport, with a knife. I had bigger things on my mind at the time. When I got there, I glanced at my watch. 9:59. I watched as it ticked closer and closer to 10 p.m. Obviously, though, it must have been a bit off, as it showed 10:008 when I heard the glass shattering. I watched in horror as a huge quadrupedal creature with smooth jet-black skin and no eyes scuttled into the airport with passerbys not reacting. I thought I even saw the creature run through them, once or twice, of course. How could I be so stupid? Obviously, they wouldn't acknowledge it as a monster. The rules had clearly stated that this was my burden and mine alone. Its jaws snapped from left to right as it sniffed the air, turning to face me while hissing. It bounded through the airport at me. Not knowing if it would be injured and not having much to lose, I swung at its exposed stomach. It stepped back, looking mildly annoyed. Then, it charged me again. Great. I'd succeeded in giving it a stomachache and securing myself a spot in the afterlife. I instinctively dashed to the side and simply got the crap clawed out of my shoulder instead of my collarbone. I pushed through the crowd and surprisingly didn't get yelled or cursed at or acknowledged at all. I reached a dead end at the Bath and Body Works shop. Why they had that at an airport, I didn't know. Desperately, I picked up a bottle of perfume and threw it at the monster. It reared back, repulsed. I quickly grabbed a can of shaving foam. I sprayed shaving foam into its nose. After discovering it could not, in fact, breathe the stuff, it began coughing. Obviously, I ran away while I could. I dashed into a side room and sat there for a moment, catching my breath. I heard an outraged roar as it stormed the airport, unable to smell for me. Shakily, I picked up a rock and threw it at the window behind me, hoping to shatter it. Unfortunately, it bounced off. The creature turned around, storming into the room. I saw its nose twitch, and as it spun around, looking for me. Unfortunately, I saw it began to slow down as it turned towards me, and so I sprayed it in the nose again with my trusty shaving foam. I dashed around it as the monster tried to reorient itself, slashing my cheek in the process. I found a side entrance, likely for employees, and escaped into the parking lot. I fumbled with my mother's keys, and finally managed to start the car. I heard it breaking through the glass. Would they fix it if it was caused by a monster? And tearing through the parking lot. I managed to veer onto the highway, hoping to mix my scent with 100 other people and their polluting cars. Not being able to smell me, the creature seemed to be checking the most densely populated areas first. Taking this into consideration, I turned into the first exit and parked on the side of the road. Then, I walked to the nearest place devoid of people, which just so happened to be an abandoned warehouse. I hid behind one of the shelves, hoping to find some medical supplies. Instead, I found a cell connection. So that brings me to where I am right now, posting what's happening to me on Reddit, just in case I don't live through this. If I survive, I'll post an update. If I don't, well, you know what happened to me. Picking up where I left off last time, I was sitting behind a creaky shelf in a warehouse. It took me about an hour to finish writing the first part. Between paragraphs, I'd take a sip of dusty water and brainstorm ways to survive the night. A few minutes after I'd posted, I was gathering supplies in a rather tattered backpack when I heard the screeching of metal being torn apart. Turning around, I saw the creature tearing through the walls, having recovered from the eucalyptus-scented shaving cream. Thanks for criticizing my wording, Reddit. Now I can die correctly. It sniffed the air and immediately its attention snapped to me. I knew the shaving cream was mostly empty, and so I threw it at the monster, full force. It roared, more annoyed than injured, judging from how it didn't flinch, and instead swiped at its surroundings, trying to hit me. I picked up the backpack, not bothering to put it on, and dashed through the hole it had made in the wall, but it turned around, smashing the window next to me. giving me a few unappreciated cuts. I practically flew to my car, almost dropping my keys as I started the engine. Deciding that, well, if they couldn't see me, I couldn't get fined, I ignored almost every traffic law. I mean, if that thing caught up to me, I'd be dead anyways. I weaved through traffic, not knowing exactly where I wanted to be. I checked my rearview mirror. Seemingly irritated that it couldn't see the cars, it fell behind, stumbling through the road. For once, I was glad to live in such a heavy traffic area. I kept checking the time as I drove. 4:50, I could see it in the distance. 4:53. It was slowly getting closer. 4:56. I'd gotten out of the more densely populated areas. It was definitely catching up faster now. 4:58. Almost there. 2 more minutes. It wasn't all that far away now. 4:59. Oh crap. Oh crap, it was only about 20 feet away. 5 o'clock, I checked the rearview mirror, and it was gone. I thought for a moment and decided to go home, hoping people would be able to see me during the day. If not, I could at least get the rules. I arrived home about a half hour later, since traffic had started to pick up. When I walked in, I noted, relieved that neither my sister nor my mother had woken up yet. I went to sleep after a long night, happy to finally be out of danger. That is, until I heard a window opening. I'm not sure when, maybe an hour or two later. The second rule flashed into my head, and I kept my eyes closed. 1 dot, dot dot, 2 3 dots. I almost furrowed my brows, worried that I might not be able to remember what to count to. 4 dots, 5 6. I could head something coming into my room. 7 8 9. It was walking across the room. The floorboards creaked as it stepped. Odd, my floorboards don't creak. 10 11 12. I could feel my mattress dipping as it climbed onto my bed. 13 14 15. It was so cold I could feel it reaching out to me. 16 17 18. It was gone. My mattress went back to normal, and I kept counting. I was a bit miffed that they'd simply wrote, "at night," since now it seemed that it just happened when the unlucky winner sleeps for a bit. Irapati yet to 29. 30. I fell back asleep. It was about 9 a.m. when I woke up again. I decided to go out and read the rest of the rules, since, well, now that I knew only the protective rules didn't apply, I had to watch out. It could have been any other rule that I'd needed, and I wouldn't have known it. 5. In the events of hearing a knock at the door, you must always look through the peephole first. If it is a delivery person, do not open the door. They know to leave it. In extension to this rule, you must bring it to whoever it belongs to. If this person isn't in your family, you must leave it near the woods. 6. Never go into the room with a gray door. All real doors in the house are white. If someone asks you to go in, whether it be alone or with them, you must decline. Real other people cannot see the door. 7. In the events of a man in a white cap asking you to follow him, accept. If you don't, you must immediately apologize. This way, you might be spared. Apologies. There isn't really much in the way of hope for those who decline. That is all for the rules. Good luck surviving in your household. You probably won't, though, as it's been documented that 80% of people who read this note eventually go insane. Remember to cross out any fake rules you see. That one's just etiquette, though, and don't worry, the page won't tear. Have a magnificent morning. I scratched out the first Rule 7 with a pencil. Wouldn't want to be rude to whoever inherited my personal hell, right? I decided that first on my to-do list would be checking if anyone could see me during the day. I knocked on my sister's door, but it swung open and I saw that it was empty. Of course, it was 9 a.m. She'd be at her day job. Oh well. But This was something I needed to know. After a quick Google search, I dialed the nearest pizza place. They seemed to hear me well enough. When they came to the door, they seemed to see me just fine. I concluded that people could see me during the day, just not at night. How inconvenient. There goes my plan of stealing everything at Walmart. I spent the day gathering supplies and pretending I wasn't in danger of dying when I spoke to my family. In the old tattered backpack, I added some clean water, a few granola bars, some money, matches, shaving cream, and a metal pipe for self-defense. Hey, it's all they had. The matches were to make a fire in case of emergency and see if that thing was flammable. I checked my watch when my mother and sister finally went to sleep. 9 p.m. Enough time to hop on a train, just in hopes of the creature taking some time to catch up. I handed my ticket in and sat down in my seat. It was 10:30 p.m. when I saw it catching up to the train. It wasn't the same creature. Crap. At 10:42, I got a good look at it. I was right. No way was this the same creature. This thing looked like all my family and friends. It was so welcoming. It wouldn't hurt me, right? Wrong. I shook myself out of it, and for just a moment it looked like a 7-foot-tall humanoid. What little hair it has is long and thin, and its eyes are devoid of emotion. Yikes. Definitely not my Aunt Jennifer. This thing is definitely a lot smarter. It picked the lock of, mind you, a moving train, and calmly walked in. One woman's purse was knocked out of the train, but she didn't even notice. Each and every passenger seemed not to care. It called my name. Alex, there you are. Come with me. We're having pasta for dinner. It hadn't spotted me yet, so it said this in a warm and loving voice while it stormed from car to car, looking around and storming to the next. Somehow, it passed by me. Come on, Alex, where are you? It's not nice to hide from your friend. It began to look more agitated, passing through each train car again until it locked its eyes on me. There you are. Not exactly being in the mood to die, I hit it in the head with my backpack. Clang. It fell to the floor. I'd been hoping it would stay that way, but it started to get up. Luckily, the train had reached a stop. I jumped out just as it got up and slammed its fists against the window angrily. I'm writing this at the train station. I can hear it screeching in the distance. So yet again, I've written it all down in hopes that, if I die, at least someone will know what happened to me. The noise is getting much, much louder. Signing off, your formerly anonymous host, Alex. New houses can be haunted, too. Here's my story. I remember the day, not too long ago, that I stood in front of my brand new home. After the year-long headache of the over-budget and over-delayed build process, I finally held the keys to the castle of my 11.4-acre kingdom. The exhaust note from the contractor's truck finally faded, leaving only the shrill whoosh of the wind blowing against the structure. The Rambler stood broad and strong under the increasingly low and dark clouds that promised a chilly fall storm. The exterior was fashioned of white brick and white wood paneling, designed to appear in a sort of rustic barn styling. Front and center was a light brown double door made from pine with 3 matching pillars on each side to support the covered front porch. The garage was facing the side. I had seen the house several times during the build process, but now that it was complete, it felt different. The house appeared ominous against the daunting clouds of the incoming storm. The yellowing grass from the sod that was planted too late in the season to properly root, along with the various shades of brown of the fields behind the house, added to the effect. Lightning struck in the distance behind the house, as if the scene was posing for a perfect photo shoot. Although it was brand new, the house had a noticeable essence, in the sort of way that a historical relic, older than any person alive, makes you wonder about the events said relic has seen. If a house could have an old soul, this house had one. It was designed to appear rustic, of course, but there was something special that I just couldn't quite put my finger on. A gust of cold wind reminded me that I had little time before the storm would unleash pounding rain and violent wind. I took a deep breath as I walked in, inhaling the smell of fresh paint and carpet. My paint and my carpet. With each step, my boots echoed through the open living area's bare walls, hardwood floors, and vaulted ceiling. When I had previously been inside the home, it was busy with workers and conversation. Now that it was empty, though, my 3,250 square feet felt oddly large to the point of being nearly lonely. For the past year, I'd been living in a cozy fifth-wheel camper while waiting for the construction to finish. As I wandered through my new home, it crossed my mind that maybe it was a bit excessive for a single 29-year-old after all. Still, I had no regrets about it. I walked through the master bedroom first, admiring the luxury of space I'd have. The California king bed I ordered would easily fit, with plenty of room to spare. Hell, the closet was roughly the size of my bedroom growing up. I strolled through the rest of the house, realizing that I had underestimated just how much furniture I would need to fill the large open spaces of the house. It was overwhelming to think of all the furniture it would take, so I decided an interior designer would be the best option. After locking the door behind me, I took one last look at the house. My house. I finally allowed myself to smile at my new symbol of success. That's what the house truly was, whether I wanted to admit it to myself or not. I didn't need all that space. I wanted to stick it to those who doubted me, underestimated me, and looked down upon me. I wanted a place to set down roots, maybe a place for a family one day. But my middle finger played a big part in my decisions. My furniture was set to arrive in 10 days. Until then, it was back to the camper before the storm hit. If only I knew the real storm that was on its way, I'd have turned away and never gone back. 1 week later. Moving in honestly wasn't much of a move. The furniture company delivered everything and arranged the house to the orders of my attractive interior designer, Rachel. Everything else that I owned, I simply carried out of my camper and into the house. Rachel was unpacking all of the kitchenware she purchased on my behalf and rolled her eyes at me when I set my coffee maker on the counter. Nope, hide that away. You can't have a red coffee maker when all of the appliances are stainless steel. Why not? I asked. Because it's hideous, she said, throwing her arms above her head with a laugh. This is why you're single, she said in a way that wasn't insulting, but perhaps slightly flirtatious. Or maybe it's because I like choosing my coffee maker, I fired back, sharing her playful tone. Yet, here you are, hiring a woman to pick out everything in your entire house, she said with a cute wink. Can't argue that, I chuckled. First time I've ever paid someone to spend my money for me. How much do I owe you anyway? Oh, we can discuss it over dinner, she said casually as if we had planned such an event. Dinner? Well, yeah, she said, taking a step closer. You have me working on a Friday evening. That's serious overtime right there. All right, let's go. Steak? I asked, testing to see how serious she was. I was thinking Italian, she said with a smile. I know an adorable place out by the lake. Sounds expensive. Overtime ain't cheap, cutie. You're driving, she said, already walking toward the front door. Well, I'll be damned, I thought. Got a date with a beautiful woman and didn't even have to come up with a shitty pickup line. Life was turning out all right after all. We hopped in my truck and started driving off, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something out of place. A child, staring out from a window on the main floor. I hit the brakes and turned my full attention to the window, where there was no longer a child, but the drapes were swaying slightly as they had just been moved. Are you okay? Rachel asked, staring at me intently. Yeah, I just thought I saw a coyote is all. I lied, not wanting to look like an idiot on our date. Yeah, you'll be seeing a few of those in this neck of the woods, she said with another soft laugh. With that, I put the child out of my thoughts, my foot on the gas, and started driving. Later that evening. The evening was wonderful, one of the best nights I'd had in a long time. The last decade of my life had been consumed by working and saving. Long, grueling days in remote locations left little time for romance, but that's where the money was, and money was the goal. I hadn't spent much time worrying about finding a partner, but after that date, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe I'd found her anyway. I hoped she felt the same. We'd just met, of course, and had only one date, but I was smitten. I reasoned with myself that I was setting down roots anyhow. I had my welding business, which was going great, a reasonable work-life schedule, and finally my house. Maybe having someone to share it all with wouldn't be so bad. I was just drifting off to sleep. Thoughts of Rachel on my mind when the pitter-patter of bare feet hitting the hardwood floors resonated throughout the house. I sat up in bed, quickly putting my feet on the carpeted floor and froze, listening intently and wondering if I'd really heard that. Nothing but the silence was audible. I took a deep breath to calm my heart rate, told myself I must have dreamed it, and started to lay back down. The pitter-patter came again, unmistakably the sound of quick footsteps running through my hallway, right past my bedroom door. My heart rate skyrocketed as I lurched out of bed, grabbed the pistol from my nightstand drawer, and rushed out the door ready to confront an intruder. I turned the flashlight attachment on which illuminated the hallway in the direction the footsteps ran toward, but there was nothing but a wall in that direction. I turned the light in the other direction toward the living area, walking down the hallway with the pistol held in front of me. "Who's there?" I yelled, unsure of what to do. I flipped the lights on as I entered the open living area, revealing that, like the hallway, it remained empty. I continued through the main level of the house, flipping on every light as I went through. Then I did the same with the basement, which was also empty. The last room in the basement was the laundry room. It was large for a laundry room, but designed to double as a storage area. For now, the mounted shelves stood empty, leaving the stainless steel washer and dryer as the only things in the room. I had cheaped out on this room, and instead of tile, I had ordered pergo flooring to be installed. Still, the soft gray flooring matched the rest of the house. The room was empty, but as I turned to walk out, the light flickered, then went out entirely. Nope, I thought to myself. The thing with the lights was too weird. I turned to walk out, but as I did so, I felt a tingle on the back of my neck, as if someone was right behind me, breathing on my neck and waiting to lurch. I felt goosebumps grow on the back of my neck from a cold puff of air that touched my neck, as if someone's icy breath had just touched me. I gathered my guts and span around, half expecting to be greeted by somebody or something, despite knowing that the room was empty. The room was indeed still empty, but that did little to qualm the feeling of being stalked. I turned and sprinted back up the stairs 2 at a time. I locked my bedroom door and sat propped up on my bed, leaving my bedroom lights on. My breathing was heavy and chest tight as I tried desperately to make sense of it all, telling myself that I had imagined it. I dreamed it. I definitely heard something, but it definitely wasn't real. Did it sound childlike? Raccoons. It had to be raccoons. They must have nested somewhere before all the doors and windows were in place, right? I pulled the covers over my head, like a child afraid of the boogeyman. The following day, I woke up Saturday morning with the sun already blasting the large eastward-facing bedroom windows. The bedroom lights were still on, and I was shocked to feel the weight of my pistol still in my hand. I cursed myself for having been so scared, so damn stupid, as to drift off to sleep with a loaded weapon in my hand. People have shot themselves in their sleep before, their fingers snagging on the trigger while they rolled over, unconsciously searching for a more comfortable position. I cursed myself for risking my life over a raccoon, a goddamned raccoon, as I gently placed the weapon back in the quick access gun safe I kept in my nightstand drawer. I didn't have too much time to quibble with myself over the previous night's events, though. I had to get ready for the housewarming party I planned for my family, and I needed to show off. Before hopping in the shower, I checked my cell to see a text from Rachel. "Good morning, Nick." It read, "I had a great time last night. Good luck with your housewarming party." A smile grew on my face. I immediately forgot about the raccoon fiasco, my thoughts changing course to the date with Rachel. After dinner, we had taken a long stroll down by the lake and talked well into the dark hours. I don't normally open up about my disparate family dynamic to people, but holding her soft hand in mine gave me a giddiness enough to open my mental floodgates and spill my personal details. Somehow, we had explained much about our life stories to each other with ease, finding many similarities between our upbringings. I'd thought about asking her to come, but felt that it might be too much after only one date. I had done so little dating in my adult life that I wasn't quite sure what a normal flow should be in a romantic relationship, but I did think that we were starting one. Besides, subjugating her to deal with my stepfamily seemed cruel. So instead, I resent a text message returning her thoughts about having a great time with the date, and added that I hoped we could do it again soon. Later that afternoon, I had just finished setting up the large charcuterie board, arranged based on a picture Rachel had sent me when the doorbell rang. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and opened the door with a fake smile. "Good to see you, Nicholas," my stepsister said, with an equally fake smile, holding some sort of casserole over her pregnant belly. "Thanks for coming, Abilene." I returned as I held the door open for the parade of her 3 kids aged 6, 4, and 2. Her tired-looking husband, Brad, held up the rear of the formation holding a stained diaper bag. Seeing that my stepbrother, Joshua, was rolling down the street in his silver minivan, I kept the door open. "It's a little big for someone without any kids, don't you think?" Abilene said, in the voice one makes when they are trying to mask their condescending judgment with a compliment. The blows were being thrown early, but it was my day to show off. I refused to let Abilene take that from me. "Nope," I said, not having to fake my grin this time. "I enjoy the space, and if I do decide to have kids, this way they won't be stuck sharing rooms." Her fake smile dropped at this low blow, taking the subtle hit about how she would soon have a family of 6, living in a 3-bedroom suburban townhouse. "Tennessee versus Georgia is on," I said, tossing Brad the remote. "I have all the games, though. Feel free to pick whatever." "Sup, man," said Josh as he walked in with his wife and 2 kids in tow. "Hey, man. Brad's getting the game on. Food is on the counter, and there are some new toys in the basement for the kids." Josh and I didn't bother trying to fake kind formalities the way Abilene does. At the mention of toys, the herd of kids rushed to the basement to see what wonders I had purchased to keep them entertained. All of the kids enjoyed Uncle Nick, much to their parents' dismay. It's stupid and weird, the way we all act like a happy, normal family, despite the obvious disdain we feel for each other. But we did it for the sake of our parents. After my mom died from cancer in 2002, my dad had become a born-again Christian and married Joanne, a prudent widow from his congregation. Within 18 months of my mother's death, I was forced into a step-family with a prude woman and her 2 prude children. Joanne and her children always looked down on me. She treated me as a second-class citizen compared to her 2 children, whom she regarded as angels. They had good grades, and stood out as faithful members of the congregation at their private religious school. Meanwhile, I was lucky enough to have been kicked out of the school after slipping a Korn album into the CD player before the Easter choir program the poor children were forced to sing in. Joanne had found my CD stash after Josh snitched and told her where I hid them. She made me watch as she broke them all. But being expelled meant I was gloriously reunited with my friends at the public school. While my step-siblings made honors and memorized their Bible verses, I kept my grades just good enough to stay on the wrestling team and spent my off-season skateboarding. Joanne and her church taught me that to be happy and successful, I had to go straight to college, go to church, get married, and have babies. Metal and skateboarding taught me to stick a finger to those assholes and do it my own way. Wrestling taught me that hard work is the avenue to success. Instead of going to college at the sacrifice of student loans and my dad's retirement like Abilene and Joshua, I worked roofing during the day to pay for welding technical school at night. After getting my certifications debt-free, I took welding work on the pipelines for a couple of years before taking Department of Defense contracts overseas. While my step-siblings were graduating college with student debt, getting married, and barely making ends meet after the cost of children, I was stacking my bank account. Sure, the work was grueling, and the quality of life welding in the Middle East was less than substandard, but I worked hard and was good at my job. Josh used his degree in business to become the manager of a tire store, and Abilene put her $25,000 piece of paper degree on the wall and became a stay-at-home mom. Meanwhile, I made a triple-digit salary, with my cost of living being almost nil. I put almost every dollar away in savings and investments that stacked up quickly. Finally, 15 months ago, I came back home and started my own business, which was taking off. Now, I had my 3 employees work the shitty hours on the pipelines while I handled the work that could be done in shop. I did this all without wasting money on college or time at church. That's why I built such a nice house I didn't need to say fuck you to everybody who doubted me, to let them know I did it my way and did it better. Nick, the house looks amazing, congratulations. This time I didn't have to fake the smile on my face. I turned and gave my dad a big hug, happy to finally hear someone be genuinely happy for me. In my late teen years and early 20s, we hadn't talked much. But in the past 4 years, we managed to put the past behind us and forgive each other. Now we spend every other weekend fishing. Thanks, Dad, I said, before seeing Joanne's fake smile behind him. It's a little big for someone without kids, don't you think? Joanne asked, like mother, like daughter. Before I could come up with anything to fire back with, Abigail, Abilene's oldest child, tapped me on the elbow. Uncle Nick, I thought you didn't have any kids. She phrased the statement as if it was a question. I don't, I told her, crouching down to make better eye contact with her. Then who's the little girl downstairs? What little girl? I asked. The only kids here are your cousins and siblings. No, there's a little girl in the laundry room. She keeps crying. I shuddered at the mention of the laundry room. Under normal circumstances, it would have been much easier to chalk this up to the imagination, but I was still haunted by a bad feeling deep in my chest about what happened the night before. I promise you there's nobody in there, I told her, pushing any doubts to the corner of my mind. But there is. I saw her, Abby insisted, getting frustrated that I didn't believe her. Okay, I said before her mother could intervene. Let's go take a look. She grabbed my hand and led me downstairs, her parents following behind. See, no one here, I told her, secretly relieved. But she was right there, Abby insisted, pointing to the corner furthest from the door. Right there. I was at a loss for words, not sure how to explain this away. The chance to attempt an explanation was taken away from me anyhow, as Abilene started scolding her daughter. She went off on something about making up stories, but I wasn't listening because, for a split second, I thought I heard the faint crying of a little girl. later that night. The one nice thing about my stepfamily is that nobody overstays their welcome. By 3:30 in the afternoon, everybody had left, and I collapsed on my couch with a beer in my left hand and a phone in my right. I'd asked Rachel to stop by and finish off the charcuterie that had been barely touched by my family, but unfortunately, she was obligated to family dinner. Although I wanted to see her, I couldn't complain about an evening spent watching football and drinking a few beers. But before I got too comfortable, I went downstairs and tucked away all of the toys the children had enjoyed. Cars and Barbies were strewn all over the basement, but I was happy to see that the kids had dived into the books I had purchased as well. Their books at home were largely religious-based. I figured they'd enjoy a couple of books about farts and such. I shoved everything into storage underneath the stairs. The rocking horse barely fit through the door because it was so large. It hadn't been cheap, but the kids had absolutely loved it, making it worth every penny. Before I headed up the stairs, I stopped and stared at that laundry room. I didn't want to admit it, but the room exuded a sort of feeling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It just felt wrong. Even looking at the room from a distance left me feeling uneasy and creeped out. It was more than just the weird experiences that both Abigail and I had. It was a feeling of hellish dread that seemed to emanate from the room. I hurried over and closed the door before quickly moving up the stairs. I had a dream that night. At least I thought it was a dream, where I found myself in the basement washroom. It was crying that had drawn me to the room, the crying of a child. She was in the corner, wearing white pajamas with pink unicorns. She was sitting down, her legs crossed in front of her. Her head was buried in her hands, with her long brown hair draped over her in a tangled mess. She was sobbing uncontrollably. I'm no expert in kids, but I guessed her to be 6 or 7 years old. I knelt behind her and put a soft hand on her shoulder. At my touch, she flinched and stiffened up, as if bracing for a hit. Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. Maybe I can help you. What's the matter? I told her in the most soothing, non-threatening manner that I could. She loosened some at the sound of my voice, but continued to cry with soft sobs. I'm stuck here, she said between sobs. What do you mean you're stuck here? How'd you get here anyway? I asked. The bad man brought me here, and we can't leave. We're stuck here with the scary thing. She burst into another round of sobs. What do you mean you're stuck? I asked, ignoring all of the other nagging questions. Maybe I can help you, I added reassuringly. At that, she stopped crying and turned her head to face me. You can help me? She asked, now facing me with her hair obscuring most of her face. Of course, I said warmly. I reached up and brushed the hair away from her face, but immediately pulled back when I saw it. I tried not to show the horror and disgust I felt, but that was nearly impossible. Her face was battered, bruised, swollen, and misshapen so horribly that I couldn't get a single idea of what she actually looked like. She looked as if she had been ruthlessly beaten. Her swollen neck displayed deep bruising and rings completely circling her neck. Please, she said again, grabbing my hand as she started to cry again. Please, you have to help me. You have to help, please? Before I could get a grip on myself and think of something to say, the lights in the room went out. With the darkness, a cold fell on the room, the kind of cold you'd expect to feel outside on a cold winter night. I heard something walk up behind me and felt it too. It was a presence, a cold, dark, evil presence. The girl screamed so loud it hurt my ears. Behind me I heard laughter, a deep, maniacal laughter. No! She screamed as the laughing intensified. No, 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 no! Help! Heal! Pop! That's when I woke up. I rubbed my eyes, scared, but relieved that it was only a dream. My relief didn't last long, however, as I realized that I was not in my bed, nor was I on my couch. I was on the floor of the laundry room. At the realization, I jumped to my feet and hurried to the light switch, nearly slamming into the wall. I felt along the wall, frantically searching for the light switch that seemed to no longer be there. At last, I found the light switch and flipped the lights on immediately, pushing out the darkness. There was no little girl, no terrifying laughter, but there was the rocking horse, the one I had put under the stairs only hours ago. The following day, I hadn't slept at all after waking up on the laundry room floor. After that dream, which I was not sure was an actual dream, I felt genuinely shaken up. To be completely honest, I was scared, and more than just a little bit. Too many strange things had happened in my home in such little time. I tried to reason with myself that everything had a logical explanation. This house was brand spanking new. It couldn't be haunted, could it? But in my heart, I knew something unexplainable was taking place. I could feel it. Rachel was on her way, though, which granted me a welcome distraction. We had plans to make and eat breakfast together. The text she sent telling me that she was on her way brought a smile to my face, and I immediately pushed aside my fear because I needed to freshen up. I had a lady to impress. "So, Nick, how are you settling in with this handsome house?" Rachel asked, as we sipped our second or third serving of mimosas. The golden morning sun shone through the large windows that faced the rear of the home, warmly illuminating the home in such a way that made it hard to believe the unsettling experiences I'd had. "You know, it's great," I said. My mind involuntarily moved to the incident with the little girl, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot. "Really, I'm surprised every time I see it. It seems too beautiful to be mine." "Why do you hesitate?" she asked. "What do you mean?" You hesitated. Is there something that you don't like about the house? No, it's just that. I trailed off, not sure if I wanted to finish the sentence. "Tell me," Rachel insisted, slamming the table in a pretend show of aggressive frustration. "I think this house is haunted," I blurted out. "But it's brand new," Rachel returned, looking more serious this time. "I know how that sounds," I said, putting my hands up as if surrendering. "But hear me out." I proceeded to tell Rachel everything, starting at the beginning with the time I saw a child peering out the window as we left for our date. I told her about the footsteps I sometimes heard at night, about the crying girl my niece insisted she had seen, and finally about the weird dream I had before waking up in the laundry room. I finished the story while Rachel listened intently. I paused, worried that she'd think me crazy and make an excuse to leave, but her response was nothing of the sort. "I believe you," she said, putting down her glass. I let out the breath that I hadn't realized that I was holding in, relieved to find a serious but reassuring look on her face. "I saw a girl too, on the day you moved in." I blew it off and kept telling myself that it was some sort of illusion, but I haven't been able to let it go. She put her hand to her head as if experiencing a serious headache. It just felt so, well, creepy. I don't know how else to put it. A small smile crept on my face. I was aware that the smile was out of place, but I found it strangely touching to know that I wasn't alone in these strange, even dark, experiences. Rachel looked at me confused for a moment before she also smiled, and we both broke into a weird fit of anxious laughter. "My brand new house is haunted," I said after getting a hold of myself and finding a more serious tone. "I'll be honest, I'm scared of my house." "Well," Rachel started, with her flirtatious glint reappearing in her eye, "maybe it wouldn't be so bad if you weren't sleeping alone." "I think you might be right," I laughed, "but I'm not sure my bed is big enough. Maybe we should go make sure my bed will fit us both." The bed, as it turns out, was plenty big and sturdy, enough for the both of us. 2 weeks later. I had woken up around 1 a.m. to the pitter-patter of feet running throughout the house, an occurrence that had happened often to both myself and Rachel over the previous 2 weeks. We'd both heard crying a time or two and had just ignored it. The toys that I had kept stored underneath the stairs were often found scattered around the basement. Although somewhat creepy, I had decided to just let it happen. Rachel had stayed over most nights, which was great for many reasons. I'd sometimes wondered if things were moving too fast, but it was working great, and I'm not one to argue with a good thing. Besides, I felt much more at ease not being alone at night, and I began to think that maybe I could get used to living in a haunted house. I reasoned with myself that it was just a child ghost after all, and what harm could a child be? Despite that, I couldn't escape the disconcerting question as to why a child would be haunting my house. The house was brand new. There were no previous occupants to have died in the home. Rachel and I theorized that perhaps there had been a car accident on the road resulting in the death of a child, but had not been able to find any corroborating evidence while searching the news archives. That particular night, however, it felt different. Usually, it was just a sound that I could blow off and go back to sleep, allowing the sound to be filtered out with the background noise. Instead, I felt an intrusive sense of fear, dread, and sorrow that held me tight to the bed and threatened tears as I suddenly wanted to cry. I wanted to move, but the weight of fear pinned me to the mattress. I heard a whisper, in the voice of a scared child, say, "Please, please help me." The whisper in my ear was enough to overcome my paralyzing fear and jolt me to my feet. I had to get away from whatever was going on, the way you feel the need to get away from a bee buzzing in your ear. I walked quickly, but quietly, to the master bedroom where I splashed water on my face. The soothing touch of the cold water shocked my senses, but helped bring me back to reality. It was probably just a dream, another creepy dream brought to me courtesy of my creepy house. My chest expanded as I inhaled a deep, comforting breath, then relaxed as my chest pushed the breath out, allowing me to open my eyes. My heart plunged into my kidney the second I opened my eyes. There was someone, or maybe I should say something, standing directly behind me. The monstrous thing was humanoid in form, but there is no way it could be called human. It towered above me, standing so tall that its head was nearly touching the ceiling. Although it was dark, I could see that its skin was composed of a blotchy black and red, yet slightly translucent plastic-like substance that reminded me of dirty saran wrap. I desperately wanted to run, or scream, or anything besides just standing there, but I once again found myself held tight with paralyzing fear. Although it had no iris nor pupils to be seen, I felt its empty white eyes staring madly into mine. The thing leaned forward until its head was just above mine in the reflection and placed a hand on my shoulder. The hand was so cold that it burned as if my skin had encountered dry ice. My reaction was to pull away from the pain, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, and not just by fear. Some force had stolen my ability to move. I found myself unable to so much as grimace at the pain in my shoulder. The hideous beast smiled at me in a threatening fashion, exposing black gums with only a handful of long gray teeth. It winked at me, as if to say, "There's nothing you can do to stop me." And then it was gone. The weight was lifted from my shoulder and the burning stopped. I dared an attempt to wiggle my fingers and found that I had regained the freedom to move of my own free will. I had just enough time to turn on the light before the screaming started. Piercing screams of intense fear and agony exploded through the house, dicing the eerie silence of the night. My first thought was of Rachel, so I burst back into the room to find her still asleep, unfazed by the horrific screams as if she could not hear them at all. The screaming continued, and my heart fell as I realized the agonizing sound was coming from the basement. I didn't want to go. I was terrified and considered waking Rachel and vacating the damned house. But my inner conscience told me I needed to try and help the poor hurting souls, despite the fact that I hadn't the slightest idea how to do so. I made my decision, and without further hesitation, I hurried to the basement. As I descended the stairs, the screaming grew louder. I reached the basement where I found the light in the laundry room flickering so fast it created a strobe-like effect, casting flickering shadows across the entire basement as if a concert was playing. I ran into the room where the toy horse was rocking violently in the middle. Laundry detergent fell off a shelf and burst onto the floor as the screams reached an unbearable and inhuman volume, so loud pain erupted deep inside my ears. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing so hard that it hurt my head, but it did little to vanquish the intensity of my pain. My knees were suddenly weak as I became physically and emotionally overwhelmed, and I collapsed to my knees as if the weight of my body had become too much for my shaky legs to carry. The sound was all-encompassing, not coming from any specific part of the room, but existing in all parts of the room. I squeezed my eyes shut in a feeble attempt to concentrate and find some sort of solution when it hit me. The walls. The screams were coming from the walls. Before I understood what I was doing, I stood and slammed my fist into the wall closest to me. My hand went straight through the drywall, hitting the concrete behind it. A pain shot through my knuckles and up through my elbow. But in the adrenaline-fueled moment, I paid the pain little mind and ripped as much of the drywall out as I could. I used the opening to grab more drywall and rip off piece after piece until finally, an entire board of drywall was loose. I grabbed one more time and pulled, forcing the entire 8-foot by 4-foot section to fall. The screaming stopped immediately, as did the strobing of the light. For a brief moment, all was still. The room was quiet. After the drywall fell, a plastic bundle fell from between the exposed framing and hit the floor with a dull thud, landing partially on my bare foot. I was breathing heavily, but managed to take a couple of deep breaths and regain some composure at the eerie but welcome silence. I took a knee beside the bundle and rolled it over. What I found caused my heart to beat with the ferocity of a death metal drum solo that blurred my vision with every beat. Tightly squeezed inside the layers of thick plastic was that little girl, the one I had seen crying in the basement. Or her body, I should say. I could see her misshapen and rotting face still frozen with the fear of her final moments of life. Her brown hair, coated in decaying blood, was plastered against her face by the tightly wrapped plastic. It took me a few moments to notice that now I was the one screaming. I backed away, shocked by the body that had been rotting within the walls of the home I had been so proud of. Then, the lights went out, submerging me into a pit of darkness. The only thing I could see was the demonic beast that I had encountered earlier, somehow visible in the eternal darkness. The scary thing. I backed away as it moved toward me, a menacing combination of amusement and hatred staining its almost human face. I felt my heel slip out from under me on the spilled laundry detergent. I fell, hitting the back of my head on the washer. 20 minutes later, I regained consciousness outside the house, where I found myself on a stretcher being pushed down the driveway. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the white exterior of the home, illuminating it in a daunting fashion. It reminded me of the day I was given the keys, and I once again found the house to appear daunting and secretive. I knew that what I had just uncovered was only a scratch on the surface of the hellish secrets contained in that home. A sobbing and exasperated Rachel was explaining what had happened to a shocked-looking officer as more patrol cars raced down the street. He looked to be about my age, old enough to have some solid experience under his belt, but the look on his face showed that no amount of training and experience could have prepared him for this. Despite the chaos, I felt at ease. Somehow I knew that it was over, for that little girl at least. She'd asked for help, begged for it, and I thought that maybe I had given her the help she needed, the help she deserved. The next few nights were a nightmare of a different sort. I repeatedly gave careful statements to the police, trying to describe how I came to find a body in the walls of my house in the middle of the night, without raising suspicion or sounding crazy. They had searched my house for more bodies. Thankfully, there were none. What they did find, though, was a large pentagram, along with other demonic symbols painted underneath the flooring. The general contractor of the house had been brought in for questioning, who quickly admitted that because I had picked cheaper finishing for the room, he had hired some guy off the classifieds and paid him under the table. DNA evidence found on the body matched multiple crimes across the country, and the contractor was able to successfully ID the same man in a photo lineup. The going theory is that this man performed some sort of satanic sacrifice in the night when nobody else was around. He then covered it up with the flooring and by hiding the body in the wall. The little girl had been kidnapped from her home in a different state 6 months prior, which meant he kept her for several months before killing her. The worst part is, they have only a photo of this man, no name or solid information to be found. Nobody knows exactly who he is, why he did what he did, or where he is now. He's still out there, and I know without a doubt that he'll kill again. How to survive in hell. I woke up in a birthing sack. Panicked and choking on amniotic fluid, I clawed at the fleshy walls, fighting with all my terrified strength to free myself. With a wet ripping sound, I was dumped onto the muddy cobbles of the street below, twisting my ankle as I landed. Cold rain blasted my naked body clean of the sack's liquid. I tried and failed to get to my feet. The street was alien to me, an insane medley of architecture ranging from the modern to the prehistoric. The sky above boiled with storm clouds, illuminating my surroundings with non-stop flashes of lightning. A man walked over to me. His hair was matted with filth, and the rain streaked down his mismatched leather clothes. He said nothing, just watched me squirm on the floor. "Please," I gasped. "Help me." He answered by slamming a foot down on my face, breaking my jaw and making my vision reel. He moved onto my limbs, stamping and tugging until he heard the bones snap. Crippled, naked, and screaming, there was nothing I could do to defend myself when he started to eat me alive. My introduction to hell wasn't unusual. Very few people survive their first hour, let alone their first night. When they die, they go through the same thing again, emerging from a new birthing sack in another part of the city. Eventually, they learn to attack the first person they see, and if they're lucky, they'll be able to kill that person. That's the one rule of hell, the strong take from the weak. Get used to the idea, and you might just make it through the afterlife. I'm going to give you a helping hand. Consider this your handbook to hell, a primer on the inferno. Make no mistake, though, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. When you die, you'll owe me one. Don't worry about trying to find me. I guarantee we'll run into each other eventually. Eternity is a long fucking time, so it's a matter of when rather than if. Do as I tell you, and you'll have a better chance than most of avoiding my own nasty introduction to the pit. Welcome to hell. Some people swear they saw a light at the end of the tunnel when they died. To my mind, those people either hallucinated or they're lying. Most of us just wake up in a birthing sack a few minutes after death. The buildings of hell are covered in the things, horrible yellow-brown pimples growing out of the brick. I've already mentioned that the first thing you need to do is claw your way out and get ready to fight. This is where the real bitch of the situation comes into play, since not everybody has the strength to break through their sack's flesh. You get the body you had just before you died, see? So, Let's say you were born a cripple, or maybe you died too young or too old. Tough shit. You're going to have a rough eternity drowning in birthing fluid over and over. If you manage to break free of your sack, don't waste time moping around, wondering what the fuck happened. Get on your feet and get ready to defend yourself. Chances are good that the first person who sees you will be hungry. There are no plants or animals in hell, so cannibalism is your only option if you don't fancy starving to death and having to start over. Aim to kill the first person you see. It might take a few tries. Most of hell's residents have been fighting for survival a lot longer than you. They might have armor made from tanned skin, scavenged metal and bone. They'll almost certainly have a shiv, club, or axe. All of that will be useful to you if you can take it from them. The next thing to do is find shelter. It never stops raining in hell, and pneumonia is a shitty way to die. Luckily, you'll have a selection of buildings to choose from. Ever wanted to live in a rundown Victorian manor with half a roof and no furniture? How about an ancient Egyptian mud brick hovel? If people have built it, you can find a crumbling version of it in hell. Pick a building, kill any squatters you find and move in. The best houses are the ones that come with a supply of scrap metal and timber. Not only are these good for making weapons with, they're also vital for getting drinkable water. I learned the hard way that hell's rain is teeming with disease. It has to be boiled before it's safe, so getting a fire going and something to make a bowl with is a necessity. So, we've killed our first man and found a home. Things are going well. Get that far, and you're going to want to hang on to what you have forever. You won't. Something will kill you eventually, and you'll have to start over. My record is a year. If you want to beat that, you'll need to understand hell and its denizens. The damned. The people of hell can be grouped into two categories. The first, the fresh meat, are those who've just climbed out of a birthing sack. It's kill or be killed when it comes to fresh meat. Always has been. The newly birthed want clothing and tools, and will kill to get hold of them. The second category, the residents, view fresh meat as a quick and easy supply of food, leather and bone. Residents have an easier time of it for sure, and all of them will fight to retain their resident status for as long as they can. Make no mistake though, residents victimize each other just as much as they prey on the fresh meat. If you're a woman, for instance, well, you better get over any hang-ups you have about rape. Women get raped in hell far more than men. It's just a fact. If you're not one of those bodybuilders or warrior women, do the smart thing and prostitute yourself for protection. Self-respect doesn't keep you breathing. Remember how you get the body you had just before you died? Well, that fact forms the core of hell's society. The truth of the matter is that throughout history, it's usually been men who die in battle. That means that in hell, there are a lot of men with young, strong bodies fit for war. Don't like it? Tough. Those are the guys who call the shots. If you can't fight them, you better do as they tell you. If you live long enough and fight well enough, you might get invited into one of the resident tribes. These are groups of people who band together for the sake of safety in numbers. Believe me, being part of a group makes things a lot easier in hell. However, keep in mind that you're only part of the tribe for as long as you're a resident. Get yourself killed, and it's back to being fresh meat. Tribes offer the closest thing to civilized society you'll find in hell. If you're part of a tribe, you have people on your side who probably won't kill you unless shit gets rough. Doesn't sound like much, but that's about as good as it gets. My own survival record was thanks to getting into a tribe. Life was good for a while there. We had about 50 soldiers and plenty of girls to fuck. Nobody could touch us, and the men abided by an honor code, so the usual fear of being stabbed in the back by your friends wasn't too much of an issue. I could have spent my eternity in reasonable comfort. but hell has ways of fucking over a good thing. Human flesh and boiled rainwater doesn't exactly make for a balanced diet, and sooner or later, even the strongest resident dies of malnutrition. I did well to last a year on it, though the last few months were agony. If I believed in God, I'd swear he designed hell in such a way that nobody stays on top of the food chain for long. The city and the wasteland. Most of the damned live in Dis, the city of hell. That's where all the fresh meat is born, and considering the size of the place coupled with the short life expectancy, a lot of people will spend eternity without ever setting foot outside of Dis. Take my advice. Do not leave the city. Things are rough on the streets, that's true. But trust me when I say it gets a whole lot worse if you try to leave. Dis is surrounded by a wasteland called Gehenna. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just an empty expanse of gray stretching out into infinity. Sometimes the damned lose that fire in the belly, the will to survive, and set off wandering into Gehenna. Most of them never come back. I made the walk myself once, a long time ago. I don't care how hard you think you are. Spend enough time in hell, and it starts to break you down. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a good person who never deserved this. Nobody can say that and not be a liar. I'm not evil, though, or rather, I wasn't. Not until I got to hell. You murder, rape, and torture because you know they do the same to you. You're murdered, raped, and tortured because they know you'll do the same to them. Give it long enough and you just don't want to face it anymore. That's when you take the walk into Gehenna. The first couple of miles I walked were nothing special. The rain stopped after a while, the sludge beneath my feet giving way to gray ash, and I caught my first glimpse of hell's sky beyond the clouds. It was a flat gray with a white sun, completely devoid of beauty or warmth. I trudged on. While walking through Gehenna, I lost any urge to eat, drink, or sleep. My body started to waste away, but I didn't care. Even when my skin started to peel away and my bones were exposed, I didn't care. The further I walked, the hollower I became in mind, body, and soul. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept going. Frankly, I don't want to know. Some part of me still wanted to live, so I turned back. I'd walked for days, maybe weeks, yet when I turned around, Dis was only a few steps away. I stepped back into the city and my body finally fell apart. When I emerged from my birthing sack, I swore never to step foot into Gehenna again. Escaping from hell. There are ways to leave hell. That should be obvious. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Sometimes the living get it into their heads that they want to talk with the dead. They get their crystals, incense, and spirit boards in the hopes of reaching their loved ones. Most do nothing more than trick themselves into thinking they've made contact. They smile or cry, convinced their beloved granny is playing the harp on a cloud somewhere before getting on with their lives. A few have the skill to actually reach us, though. They can open a gate between hell and the world of the living that we perceive as a pillar of fire stretching down from the clouds. As soon as one of those pillars shows up, the damned scramble to be the first to get to it. You haven't seen the true nature of man until you've watched thousands of the damned swarming over each other, kicking, biting, and clawing to be the one who escapes. Contacting the dead always results in a bloodbath. Even the most civilized tribes fall apart the instant it becomes clear that only one of them can leave. I've left hell twice now, left my body behind and ridden that pillar of fire up into the clouds. Some people believe that you can be possessed by demons. Let me tell you something. Demons aren't real. What the living see as demonic possession is just one of the damned testing out their new body. Let's face it, if you've fought your way through hell to get back to the world of the living, you're not going to be on your best behavior for long. Sooner or later, we take things too far. Our host dies, or their family cave and recruit an exorcist. Then we're fresh out of the birthing sack and on the streets again. I'm gonna go now. When you get to hell, remember my advice and that you owe me one. Maybe we can form a tribe someday. For the time being, though, I want to see what my new body can do. By now, you should have a good idea of what you can expect from hell. You know to kill the first person you see when you fight your way out of a birthing sack. You know to find clothing, tools, and shelter. You know that no matter what you do, how well you do, someday it's back to being fresh meat. Dis is the biggest city you can imagine. Tribes fight and die for territory, and taking a wrong turn is a fucking death sentence. You'll get a feel for where you should and shouldn't go eventually. Develop the kind of street smarts you need to stay a resident for more than a day. Even so, there are places in Des that you should know about. Let's do a little sightseeing tour of hell. Maybe the advance warning will do you some good. Skin Street. Allow me to tell you about the first time I saw Skin Street. I dropped out of my birthing sack onto the road, stood straight back up, and got myself ready to fight. Nobody was there. Not one single person was out on a street that stretched for miles in either direction. I relaxed a little and took a look around. Most of the streets in Dice are a labyrinthine network of buildings. You spend most of your stay in hell paranoid that, just around the next corner, there's someone ready to beat you down. Skin Street isn't like that. It's a single straight line with only the rain and the darkness to hamper visibility. I felt more vulnerable there than I've felt in any other part of Dis. You ever walked into a wide, empty space and suddenly felt exposed? Yeah, imagine also being naked, unarmed, and in hell. Still, I knew what I was supposed to do. The first step was to find some clothing. That's where I learned how Skin Street got its name. Every building, every busted street light and gas lamp was decorated with flayed skin. I'd been in hell long enough by that point to not be too freaked out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. In a fucked up kind of way, it reminded me of Christmas. You know? People hanging wreaths and lights from their houses, that sort of thing. I remembered the time I'd spent with my family, with my kids on Christmas morning. Feelings like that get you killed. I pushed them back down and pulled some scraps from the nearest building. If somebody was going to leave clothing material lying about, I may as well take it, right? I didn't know it at the time, but every step I took on Skin Street was being watched. When the attack came, I didn't even get a glimpse of the guy. Bang. My skull fractured from an expert swing of a club. Whoever hit me went for my eyes the second I hit the floor, stuck his fingers right into my sockets. I was blind and crying like a baby when he started to peel away my skin. Here's the thing. Some people are fucked up even by hell's standards. The loners, serial killers, stalkers, and psychos all make their way to Skin Street in the end. Most of the damned use the whole body of a kill, but the Skin Street people like to take trophies. They leave their ornaments out as bait for the ignorant, skulking in the shadows and waiting for the best moment to ambush. If you find yourself on Skin Street, you're going to have to think fast. Forget clothing. Just grab a rock, piece of wood, or anything else you can use as a weapon. Stay out of the shadows, keep checking behind you, and get out of there as quickly as you can. Perdition Farms. You're going to be chased in hell. That's unavoidable. At some point, you'll stumble into somebody bigger than you, or you'll find yourself outnumbered. Forget about a fair fight. If somebody can take you down without you fighting back, you bet that's what they'll do. It's easy to lose focus when you're running for your life. You can forget to pay attention to your surroundings. That, my friend, is a big mistake. The outskirts of Perdition Farms are littered with billboards. They promise free food and safety to anybody fucking stupid enough to believe them. The tribes that fight over that particular territory like to herd people off the streets and into the industrial complex they call home. The good news is that those tribes won't kill you. The bad news is that they're big fans of taking people alive. They've got a project, you see. Been working on it for as long as I can remember. I couldn't tell you who originally decided that hell should have organized food production. Only that the idea stuck, and that over the years, countless tribes have taken it upon themselves to try and make that dream a reality. Get yourself captured by them, and you can look forward to a bit of slave labor. For the most part, the Perdition Farms tribes try to make use of the birthing pods as a source of food. They force their slaves to harvest them from the walls, grind them up in industrial vats, mix them with blood, body parts, rainwater, and anything else that could conceivably make a broth. The life of a slave is short, brutal, and disgusting, particularly when those slaves are then used as guinea pigs for the latest concoction. You see, amniotic fluid can be drunk if you're desperate, though drinking too much is guaranteed to make you empty your stomach from every available orifice. The flesh of the sacs is a different matter, though. I couldn't tell you exactly what the birthing sacs are. Some people say they're actual flesh, while others swear they're more like a fungus. What I do know is that they repair themselves over time. Eat some of their flesh, and over the next few days you'll grow a new birthing sac inside you. It's a small mercy that you won't live long enough to see it break through your skin. You'll be dead shortly after your stomach bursts. If you're lucky, your days as a slave will end when the tribe decides they want some real meat. They're not stupid enough to test their broth themselves, not when there's no shortage of slaves in hell. Look, I can't force you to stay out of Perdition Farms. I can only offer advice. In my opinion, if you think you're being herded there, it's better to take whatever's to hand and cut your own throat. I'd take fresh meat status 100 times before spending another day on the farms. The boneyard. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm the kind of nutjob who'd join a cult. Is there anything in hell for me? If that sounds like you, the boneyard has you covered. You see, there's a certain kind of religious fanatic who really does belong in hell. I'm not talking about the old dears who bake cakes to raise money for the new church roof here. I'm talking about the guys who went to war because God commanded it, who burned women for supposedly consorting with demons, and who saw nothing wrong with fucking the odd kid. When those people get to hell, they're too thick-headed to make sense of what happened. Why face reality when you can pretend it's all just a test of faith? They find like-minded folk in the boneyard. I'm told that at one time, the boneyard was a cathedral surrounded by a cemetery that stretched from horizon to horizon. Maybe that's true. I don't know. These days, it's a shanty town of temples and churches built from materials scavenged from the streets. Everywhere you look, you'll find wild-eyed zealots preaching their own twisted version of redemption and gangs of masked men on the prowl for fresh converts. Mortification of the flesh is the main pastime in the boneyard. If you listen to the cacophony of sermons, you'll be informed of how the flesh is wicked and must be purged of sin. How lucky we are to be given such a holy duty. How fortunate to be given the opportunity to redeem ourselves before God. The people of the boneyard have had a long time and plenty of fucking practice when it comes to mastering torture and degradation. I'm not a good person. I've killed, raped, and cannibalized, but I can honestly tell you I'd never have been able to dream up some of the shit that goes on in the boneyard. I wandered in there by accident once, and I've never been able to get what I saw out of my brain. I watched a woman, naked and bound, forced onto her knees and violated with iron rods. A preacher sewed his own eyes and lips shut in front of a crowd before sawing off his manhood with a piece of slate. A boy of maybe 14 was publicly crucified. A girl was drowned in shit. An older man had sharpened flint pushed under his fingernails. I could list off 100 other atrocities done in the name of redemption. Stay away from the boneyard. The people there decided that hell just isn't hellish enough for their liking. Forget about redemption. Forget about God. The only way out of hell is by riding a pillar of fire and taking over a living body. Focus on that if you want to escape. The damned can't offer you salvation. The damned only offer pain. I have to leave you soon. If I'm to make the most of life on earth, I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, Mummy and Daddy are already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few of the locations I myself have run into, and that will have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within D's, I still couldn't tell you everything about the city. What I can do is give you a bit of information about some of the damned, the slaughter man. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in D's? Not many, I'll wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The slaughter man is one of hell's legends, a huge bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam on his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver tribe. Well, those tribesmen chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the slaughterman shrugged off the clubs battering against him and the whips cutting into his flesh as though they were insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hand into the man's mouth, and pulled his jaw right off his skull. He moved on to another, then another, tearing them apart with his bare hands, until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge. Supposedly, a single Viking held up the English army single-handed. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered, that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and he fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the slaughter man for myself, and I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you for sure is that people don't become legendary in hell without good reason. I'd guess that the only one who knows the truth is the slaughter man himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the slaughter man tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the slaughter man looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word. Valhalla! Hellhounds, how about a little story? I wasn't new to hell. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter and had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for Dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack to finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered, hidden, and with access to an escape route. Even then, you never get more than a few hours at a time. In hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. A low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered in weeping sores. Her lips peeled back to reveal broken and jagged teeth. It took me all of a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for days or weeks. Judging from her protruding ribs and bloated stomach, she was well on her way to dying of starvation. So she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. "I've already eaten," I said, relaxing a little and giving my club a few practice swings. "No sense in letting you go to waste, though." I took a step towards her, and she bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange, animal gait. I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on the muddy ground. When I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness of it caught me off guard, and I tripped over her, losing my club as I fell. She howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about the hellhounds: the people who lose their minds and become little more than beasts after enduring centuries in hell. Firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh from the bone. The surgeons. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme. Shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare. Survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people who might just be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's beyond a lot of the meatheads roaming dis. Most of hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of the tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could well save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves a uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work, but then you can't expect much logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. Very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of the damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. When you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for his services. You can't be certain if the man in the bird mask and black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as intended in dis. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that doesn't give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic fucking psychopaths. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitched you to somebody else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their service should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so Mengeles who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe's surgeon if you're lucky enough to have one. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over a lot of Hell's residents. Universal education is pretty recent. Freelancers aren't worth the risk. Cambions. I'll be honest with you here. I don't know if Cambions actually exist. What I'm going to tell you is something that somebody else told me. It's up to you to decide if it's true or not. Personally, I really fucking hope it isn't. People rape one another in hell. It happens a lot. If you're not strong enough, it'll happen a lot to you. The good news for the ladies out there is that damned men fire blanks. You'll almost never be impregnated. I say almost never because, if you believe the stories, there's an incredibly slim chance that a couple of those little swimmers will be awake and looking for an egg. Just to put this in perspective, we're talking conjoined twins levels of unlikeliness here, and that's just conception. The chances of a pregnant woman surviving the full 9 months in hell are probably conjoined triplets levels of unlikely. You're talking about a perfect storm of beating the odds here, but this is eternity. A monkey randomly mashing keys on a typewriter will eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare if it goes at it for eternity. The result of that perfect storm, of those monkeys with their typewriters, is a cambion, a child conceived and born in hell. I'm not saying they exist, okay? I'm saying I've met somebody who swears it's true, and that he's seen a cambion for himself. You see babies in their birthing sacks from time to time. Usually it's just a body. Occasionally you see one drowning. Most of the damned ignore them. They wouldn't survive a day on the streets, even if you could afford to devote your full attention to them. Better to leave them be. It's only the really fucked up people who cut through the sacks and... Yeah, I'm not going to finish that thought. I'm getting sidetracked. So, this cambion who may or may not have existed apparently looked like a normal child. It cried, it shit, and it sucked its mother's tits just like a regular baby would. The mother was part of a tribe, and they'd been able to protect her throughout her pregnancy. Couldn't tell you why. Curiosity, perhaps. When it was born, the whole tribe gathered around to have a look. Among them was the man who told me this story, somebody I'd meet years later and eventually kill. This man cut the baby's cord and lifted it up to his face. Every man in the tribe had raped the mother at one point or another, and he wanted to see if the child looked anything like him. The cambion looked like a normal child in every way but one. Its eyes were dead, lifeless, like a doll's. Sure, the kid was alive. It wriggled and cried like a normal baby. Those eyes were wide open, though, not scrunched closed like a newborn's eyes should be. Wide open, empty, doll's eyes. If that story is true, I don't blame the tribe for killing the child. Something like that shouldn't exist. Right, I'm done. I have to go. This is the point where people like to have things nicely tied up. A few dragons slain, a few maidens saved. At the very least, you could expect some kind of moral lesson to think over. I think that, in this case, that sort of thing is missing the point. There are no dragons to slay, no morals to learn. We do not live happily ever after. There's no grand revelation, no clever twist, no purpose, no redemption, no hope. There's only eternity among our own kind. Hello? It's been a long time. The last body I had in the living world didn't cope too well with my mind driving it. It's sometimes hard to remember that the lessons you learn in hell aren't a good fit for the civilized world. When murder is just a normal part of existence, you tend to keep doing it out of habit. The inevitable result is either death or exorcism and a trip back to the city of Dis. Safe to say, I got a bit carried away the last time I was here. After my last taste of freedom, I knew that I had to get back out of Dis. My existence ever since I squandered my last host has been utterly dedicated to fighting my way back into a pillar of fire. I had to escape Dis. After what I've seen, I had to escape. This new body seems a little more durable than the last one. Now that I'm back, shall we take another trip into hell? Phlegethon Swamp. It rains in hell. It rains all the fucking time, and that water has to go somewhere. Most of it drains out into Gehenna, where it sinks into the otherworldly ash and apparently disappears. The rest flows either into the sewers beneath the city, or it collects in Phlegethon Swamp. Remember how it's a bad idea to drink the rainwater in hell without boiling it? Well, Phlegethon's water will kill you no matter what you do with it. Even letting the stuff touch your skin can be deadly. You see, the swamp isn't just filled with disease and rot. It's also brimming with chemical waste. One pool might simply be undrinkable, but another might dissolve your flesh. If you're mad enough to travel to Phlegethon, or unlucky enough to be born there, your odds of survival are slim. Phlegethon's waters are inky black, and it's impossible to tell just how deep a pool is by looking. It could be an inch, or it could be a mile. You never know whether or not your next footfall will plunge you into the cloying abyss. Worse still, there are places where the sewers gradually drain the water and create unseen vortices capable of dragging down even the strongest of the damned. To navigate the swamp, you're better off using the crumbled buildings as stepping stones. The corrosive water causes wooden supports to wither and collapse, so there's plenty of debris lying around to stand on. Even so, if you don't take it slow and keep your balance, it's easy to slip and subject yourself to a fucking agonizing death. Last but not least are the wildfires. These are the reason that even the most insane tribes don't try to establish a permanent stronghold in Phlegethon Swamp. All that chemical waste and decaying matter makes the swamp extremely volatile. A lightning strike or buildup of gases can result in immense explosions that ignite Phlegethon's surface for miles around. Wildfires move fast. I guarantee you that you won't outrun one. Cositis. The first time you see Cositis, you could be forgiven for thinking you'd reach the very edge of Dis. The pit is dozens of miles wide and several times as deep. At some point in the dim and distant past, a fragile alliance of tribes put their slaves to work, digging a quarry. Why they did this is lost to time, but many believe it was an attempt to escape Dis. Perhaps those tribes hoped that if they dug far enough, they'd eventually tunnel their way out of hell. In my view, the more likely answer is that the tribes were looking for resources. If that's true, then the excavation was a success. Miles below the surface, beneath the rock and dirt, there are caverns filled with veins of iron and copper. So far underground and sheltered from the relentless fucking rain, it's far easier to create a fire hot enough to smelt ore. The value of such a position wasn't lost on the tribes, and that alliance soon showed just how brittle it was. After a short but savage burst of treachery, the initial settlers of Cositis all but wiped themselves out. Since then, the pit has been settled and mined countless times. Coordinated efforts from various tribes have transformed the quarry into an abyss. So far, these alliances have always been broken sooner or later. Cositis has many paths into its depths, and the lower you go, the more labyrinthine the pit becomes. The sprawling caverns shelter entire shanty towns,
and crude smelting facilities. Some are abandoned, others have been lost to cave-ins, yet there are still plenty of tribes who fight, join forces, and betray one another over the precious ore veins. By this point, you have to go pretty fucking deep to find an untapped vein, and this is where Cocytus becomes truly deadly. Anybody who thought they might be able to tunnel out of hell would be sorely disappointed once they learn what lies in the depths. In all these years, after digging for so many miles, not one person has run into some magical portal leading out of Dis. They also haven't run into magma for that matter. Instead, the deeper you go, the colder Cocytus becomes. I've never been to the very bottom myself. I'm told that down there, the air is cold enough to freeze your blood and shatter your skin. Maybe that's true. I could certainly believe it. On the rare occasions I've been to Cocytus, I've always had to turn back once the walls became more ice than rock, and the narrow walkways became a death trap. If you have the numbers to do it, Cocytus is still a valuable place to settle. Just remember that when hunger, cold, and greed are your constant companions, none of the damned can be trusted. The Pale Witch. I've told you about the Slaughterman previously, but hell has other legendary figures, each with their own sobriquets. The Ripper, the Grim Doctor, the Tyrant, and many more. So far, I've only encountered one of these figures. During my last stay in hell, I came across the Pale Witch. As is always the case with legends, the truth about the Pale Witch tends to get lost amid the superstition. I've heard plenty of theories as to what she is. The Pale Witch is a Striga who has the power of the evil eye. The Pale Witch is a Gorgon whose gaze turns her victims to stone. The Pale Witch is a succubus who entraps the minds of those she wishes to consume. All of that is bullshit. I've seen the Pale Witch and I know the truth about her. When I first saw her, I didn't realize who I was looking at. She was naked and locked in combat with an armed resident, so I just took her for fresh meat. Here's a tip for you. If you see a resident fighting fresh meat, kill both of them while they're distracted. I planned to do exactly that, but something about the fight seemed off. Residents usually have the upper hand in a fight against fresh meat, and this particular bout definitely seemed about as one-sided as it gets. She was naked, whereas he was clad in leather and bone. She was unarmed, whereas he had a club. She was wayfish, whereas he was huge. Despite him having the advantage, the resident was clearly terrified of her. The rules of hell dictated that he should have cracked her skull, taken her skin, and eaten her flesh, but that just wasn't happening. He was uncoordinated and apparently desperate to escape. Every swing he took was clumsy, and the blows he did manage to land on her didn't seem to have any effect. I could only stare as this naked, vulnerable woman took the resident's club from his unresisting hand and swung it at his knee. I'm accustomed to the sound of bones breaking by now, but this time the noise caught me off guard. How the fuck was this happening? She brought the club down on his other knee, then his elbows, then his ankles, then his shoulders. She left him broken and screaming on the floor. She could have finished him off with a blow to the head, stolen his clothing, and taken her rightful place as a resident. That's how hell works. Those are the rules I've learned through bloody trial and error. That isn't what happened. Rather than kill him, she sat down beside him in the mud and took his hand in hers. I actually thought she was going to console him, until she started breaking his fingers. One by one, she snapped the fingers on both his hands, with a calmness that made no sense to me. Torture is common in hell, but there's always a purpose behind it. The people in Skin Street do it out of sadism, and the people in the Boneyard do it for their insane purification rituals. This woman did it without emotion and without reason. I honestly don't know if she even understood that she was hurting him. I don't think her mind works the same way as ours. Eventually,
The resident lost consciousness. A man can only take so much pain before the shock gets him. Surely now she'd be satisfied. Surely she'd take his clothes and restore hell's order. Number, she stood up, tilted her head slightly, and uttered a noise for the first time. It wasn't a victory cry, nor was it even a sigh of relief. Instead, the sound she made was nothing more than a faintly bemused It was as if she couldn't comprehend why her plaything had stopped moving. She stood up and stepped away from him, apparently content to leave him alive, unconscious and crippled on the ground. She kept his club, but didn't take his clothing. The cold and rain didn't seem to bother her. Then she looked at me. In that instant, I knew I was looking at the pale witch. I looked into her eyes and I couldn't fucking move. I understood what she was straight away, and the sheer terror of it froze me. The pale witch isn't a striga, she isn't a gorgon, and she isn't a succubus. The pale witch is a cambion. It's hard to put into words exactly how paralyzing the sight of a cambion is. That perfectly serene face and those dead, staring eyes just don't belong on a body that's otherwise human. It was like looking into the face of a mannequin and knowing that it's looking back at you. That noise again. That kind of detached curiosity shouldn't exist in the world of predator and prey. Might makes right. Survival of the fittest. Nobody in the city of Dis has any right to make that noise. She took an awkward step towards me, and I saw that her right leg was broken. It seemed that her fight with the resident had injured her after all. She just didn't notice it. She tried to walk normally, completely unaware that one of her legs had an extra joint. I don't care how tough you are. Nobody should be able to put their full weight onto a broken leg without even wincing. She stepped closer, her zombie shuffle steadily closing the gap between us as I stared at her. She raised her club and my survival instincts finally kicked into gear. Her transfixing spell broke just enough for me to stumble backwards and avoid her swing. I ran. I ran from a woman with a broken leg, and I'm not even ashamed of it. Looking back on my experience, there are some things I just can't comprehend. The pale witch is a cambion, I'm certain of it. She was born in hell, and hell is all she's ever known. She also looked to be about 30 years old. That just shouldn't be possible. No baby survives long in Dis. Even if they had a tribe to protect them, there just isn't enough nourishment for an infant to grow into a toddler, let alone an adult. The pale witch is a walking impossibility. Her existence is a defiance of all reason. I would endure every torture the people of Skin Street and the Boneyard could conceive of if it meant I would never have to look into her eyes again. I attended the Devil's War Council. It would be fair to say that I had a problem with authority during my mortal existence. I guess that's why I got assigned the punishment I did once I arrived in hell. As you can imagine, rebellious behavior isn't exactly encouraged here in the underworld. The devil and his cohorts do not tolerate dissent from the damned, and it's definitely not advisable to end up on Satan's wrong side. I wasn't a good guy when I was alive. I guess that goes without saying, but it's worth repeating. However, I'm not the worst man to ever be condemned to the underworld, and I often wonder whether I deserve my fate. I did some bad shit for sure, but I was never a psychopath or serial killer. In a way, it's a shame I'm not pure evil, because those types tend to do well down here. If you are a murderous dictator or war criminal on Earth, then your skills are going to be very much in demand in this joint. That's as long as you know your place and don't dare to challenge the boss. As for myself, I suppose you could call me one of the lucky ones. That is to say, I wasn't subjected to the eternal torment dished out to millions of damned souls trapped within the 9 circles, nor was I conscripted into the zombie hordes pulled from the streets of Dis and thrown into the meat grinder, becoming cannon fodder in Satan's endless wars of conquest across multiple dimensions. No,
this wasn't to be my fate. Instead, either by luck or design, I got picked out from the rabble and assigned to work as a servant in Lucifer's palace, a grand castle of ice located in the very lowest circle of hell. Some might think this job a cushy number when you consider the alternatives. I would beg to differ, however. Can you imagine serving as a slave under the most evil and sadistic being in existence, surrounded by twisted demons and the ghosts of some of the most ruthless and bloodthirsty mass murderers in human history? If I ever put a single step out of line, I face horrendous torture at my master's hand, and therefore I must live in constant fear, unable to speak my mind or express my disgust at the savagery I'm forced to witness. But this story isn't about me. By an act of divine intervention, I've been given the opportunity to recount my sorry tale, but more importantly, I'm here to share my experiences as an observer of hell's war upon the mortal plane. I can only hope and pray that my words reach those who will listen, and that I can make some small difference in this screwed-up universe. It is often believed that Lucifer is trapped within the deepest and most severe circle of hell, level 9, treachery, a vast frozen ocean without warmth, life, or hope. Well, this is partly true. The devil is confined to the 9th circle, for now at least. But alas, he is not frozen, helpless, and impotent under the thick ice. Instead, he dwells within a vast palace built from that same icy material, its ugly towers and high walls dominating the 9th circle and acting as a lasting monument to his terrible power. Lucifer rules over hell with an iron fist, either directly or through his cadre of demonic lieutenants and subordinates. However, Satan's influence wanes, the higher one ascends through the circles, and his control of limbo, the 1st circle, is only nominal. But hell is not enough for Lucifer. It never has been. His ultimate goal is to conquer the earth, to destroy our world and take ownership of the bodies and souls of every human being. This is what he's been working towards for millennia, and there's nothing he won't do to achieve this victory. And how do I know this? Because I've witnessed his invasion firsthand. But even with his vast armies, his many fifth columnists, and his world-ending weaponry, Satan is not unopposed in these wars, and I know the forces of good are still up for this fight. But let me take you back to the day when Lucifer launched his latest blood-soaked invasion. Me and my fellow slaves were on duty inside of the war room buried deep within the icy chambers beneath Lucifer's fortified palace. How can I describe the war room? Well, my descriptive skills are likely not up to the task, but I see the room as a cross between a futuristic military command center and a medieval great hall. The walls were carved from the ice many thousands of years ago, and, as you would imagine, the interior is bitterly cold, at least for us damned souls who are dressed in little more than sparse, filthy rags. We shiver through our duties, knowing all too well the harsh penalty for making any complaint. In the center of the chamber sits a huge round table made from the finest marble. The fact that the table is circular might suggest that all who sit around it are equal in status, but I can assure you that this isn't the case. Lucifer sits upon a mighty throne of twisted iron, which towers above the wooden chairs of the other attendees. There is no doubt who is in charge inside of that room, and all others are in fearful awe of Satan's immense power. The military operations are managed through a 3-dimensional projection of our globe, which appears above the center of the vast round table, although whether this visual representation is created by advanced technology or black magic, I cannot say. In any case, Lucifer and his generals are able to zoom in to observe the many battlefields around the globe, projecting images of extreme violence for the viewing pleasure of the sadistic audience as they watch their bloodthirsty invasion play out. One thing you need to understand about hell
is that time moves at a different rate than on our world. It seems that Lucifer can bend time and space to his own will. In any event, an invasion which may last weeks, months, or even years on the mortal plane can pass in mere hours or minutes inside hell's war room. As for the role of me and my fellow slaves, well, our job is to cater to every whim of Lucifer and his demonic generals. We will bring them fresh meat, whose origins I dare not imagine, alcohol, narcotics, and sexual partners of their preference, although Lucifer forbids such activities during wartime as being unnecessary distractions. And sometimes our only function is to act as punchbags for their verbal and physical abuse. We're dealing with a cruel and sadistic crowd after all, and we slaves have no rights. We can only stand there, take their abuse in good humor, and hope the demons don't subject us to more severe tortures. What's important, however, is that we are present, and even though our masters insist we remain silent and invisible, we witness all that occurs in that horrifying room, and I saw it all on that extraordinary day in the pits of hell. Let me begin by introducing the cast of this horrid tale. Well, there's the main man, of course, Lucifer, Satan, the devil, Lord of the Flies. He is probably the second most powerful entity in existence, and boy, he's pissed at not being number one. Satan has been bitter and enraged ever since his failed rebellion and banishment from God's kingdom. For millennia, he has dwelt in hellish exile and plotted his revenge, a twisted obsession which has entirely consumed him. The devil holds all the power in his realm and is not afraid to demonstrate this fact. I have personally witnessed the devil ripping his victims limb from limb with his bare hands, only to summon a dark magic to stitch them back together again. He then repeats the process, driving his victims mad in the process. The only limit in the devil's realm is his own twisted imagination. Satan can also take many physical forms: a horned minotaur, a black dog with burning red eyes, and a crimson dragon which spits white fire. But when he's inside the war room, the devil takes on a human form, that of a slick and handsome politician dressed in a finely tailored designer suit. Or perhaps this is just how he appears to me. I guess it makes no odds in the end. I'm sure of one thing, however. No one who's ever laid eyes upon the devil on his home turf could ever mistake him. I don't know whether it's his piercing, predatory eyes or his booming, godlike voice, but Lucifer has a dark aura around him, which forces all to submit to his will out of sheer terror. Despite the vast size of the subterranean chamber, the devil likes to keep his war council small, and on the day I witnessed the events I will recount, only a half-dozen were present around the table. So, let me introduce you to Satan's unholy six. 3 of their number are demons, fallen angels, who've been with the devil ever since his failed rebellion in heaven. There are many thousands of demons within the ranks of hell's army, but these 3 are at the top of the pile, Lucifer's most trusted lieutenants and advisors, dedicated to implementing his horrific plans and fully prepared to inflict mass casualties in their pursuit of total victory. They also take the appearance of human beings while sitting around the war table. But I've seen their true, monstrous forms, like the 60-foot-tall minotaurs wielding flaming swords, their horrifying roars filling the air as they storm into battle. That's a sight you'll never forget, believe me. First and foremost is Ashtaroth, the great Duke of Hell and Satan's right-hand man. Highly intelligent, devious, and totally ruthless, Ashtaroth is notorious for his Machiavellian political skills and aptitude for extreme violence. When this demon meets your eye, you'll feel a cold chill running up your spine as you imagine the horrors he's calculating inside of his twisted mind. He is definitely to be avoided if at all possible. Next in line is Minos, Judge of the Dead and Gatekeeper of the Second Circle. All who enter hell must pass through Minos and face his judgment, and he will decide your fate and assign you to one of the torturous 9 circles. In addition to his gatekeeper role,
Minos is also responsible for recruitment into Hell's army. Millions of lost souls make up the rank and file of Satan's combat divisions. They're cannon fodder, of course, entirely expendable and ready to be thrown into the meat grinder at a moment's notice. These soldiers are press-ganged into service, but most are grateful to escape the endless torment of the circles. Minos is known to take the form of a bearded giant with a snake-like tail which wraps around his muscular body. But, in the war room, he looks quite normal, handsome even, although with a well-concealed malice behind his dark eyes. On the surface, Minos is a loyal lieutenant serving under Lucifer, although I always sensed an underlying tension between the two. Last of the demons is Leviathan, Grand Admiral, and commander of Satan's naval forces. Pale-skinned, robed, and hairless, Leviathan takes the form of a warlock whilst attending the council, and he is indeed very powerful. He alone has the ability to summon and command the gigantic Kraken, ancient sea monsters which slumber in the darkest depths of the oceans, waiting to rise the surface and wreak havoc upon our shipping lanes and ports. These Kraken are vast in size, and one is easily capable of grasping hold of an aircraft carrier or oil tanker with its mighty tentacles before dragging the boat down into the icy depths. And Leviathan doesn't have just one sea monster under his control. He has dozens. Satan's admiral says little during these war councils, but there's no doubt that he plays a crucial role in the devil's devious plans. The other 3 council members are not demons, but rather damned souls. These are Satan's generals, handpicked to coordinate his invasion and command his vast armies. All were famous, or infamous, military leaders who I suspect you might have heard of. First, there's Erwin Rommel, or the Desert Fox, as he was known on the mortal plane. The German general became famous due to his stunning performance as a tank commander during World War II, serving in France, North Africa, and France again before his death in October 1944. As he sat in the war room, Rommel looked near identical to the photographs I recall seeing in the history books, right down to his chiseled Aryan looks and spotless Wehrmacht officer's uniform. The German may have been deceased, but he remains a true professional committed to winning, even if the cause isn't his own. He is considered the best of Satan's generals and has a position of authority over the others. Next around the table is Belisarius, military commander of the Byzantine Empire during the 6th century, and instrumental in reconquering most of the Mediterranean during a series of battles and wars spanning several decades. Sometimes called the last of the Romans, Belisarius is remembered on our world as a great strategist and brave general who fought side by side with his troops. But ultimately, Belisarius was betrayed by Emperor Justinian, who ordered his general's eyes put out, leaving him as a blind beggar on the streets of Rome for the remainder of his life. In death, he remains blind, but his other senses are sharpened, and his strategic skills are as good as they were during his glory days. With his eyes removed, and his hair and beard white and disheveled, Belisarius doesn't look like much at first glance, but he's been fighting Lucifer's wars for centuries, and should not be underestimated. Last but not least on Satan's council is Boudica, queen of the ancient Iceni tribe, who led an uprising against the Roman occupiers in 1st century Britain. Clad in red robes and with long flowing hair, Boudica is known for her beauty, but also her skill and strength in battle. Her name comes from the Celtic word for victory, and despite her eventual defeat and death, Boudica is remembered as a heroine in Britain and beyond. This raises the question of how these military leaders ended up in hell leading Lucifer's vile legions. They are hardly the evilest villains from history after all. Nevertheless, Rommel was Hitler's general. Belisarius slaughtered civilians during the Nika riots, and Boudica's army put 80,000 Romans to the sword during her bloody rebellion. The truth is, few escape from war without committing mortal sins. And you're probably wondering why the worst monsters and mass killers from history don't have a seat at the table. Where are Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, you might ask? Well, don't worry. They're all here in hell. The trouble is, such megalomaniacs don't take well to being number two, and Satan never full trusts these dictators as he fears they'll stage a revolt against his rule. For those reasons, these human monsters are regulated to the very lowest level of hell, a little-known torture chamber located beneath the frozen sea of the ninth circle. Down in the icy depths, they are subjected to unimaginable and endless torture. You can sometimes hear their desperate, mad screaming through the ice, a chilling reminder of the fate of those who would dare challenge Satan in his own kingdom. So, on that fateful day, the huge ice chamber which served as the devil's war room was the place of work for me and two other damned souls. I don't know their names or what they did in life to end up down here. One learns pretty quickly that hell isn't a place for making friends. The two young men who served alongside me were anonymous and largely silent, but I could see the pure terror in their eyes and knew they were as scared and horrified as I was. But that didn't make us allies. Desperate souls have a habit of stabbing you in the back. It's every man or woman for themselves in hell. I learnt this lesson the hard way. The three of us stood silently at the back of the chamber beside a table of both raw and cooked meat, countless bottles of alcohol, and drugs of every description. We would obediently serve the demonic attendees whatever they wanted, although I knew from past experience that Lucifer didn't want hedonistic distractions during his invasions, and so we were likely to remain as silent observers throughout the events to come. Now, this wasn't the first time I'd witnessed this sequence of events, but I am always awestruck when the devil summons a three-dimensional globe the size of a football pitch above the war table, an incredibly detailed and live holographic image of the planet Earth. When he did so, I looked upon the green continents and blue oceans of my home world and felt a terrible sickness deep in the pit of my stomach, because I knew what was coming next and felt for the billions of people who were about to suffer a horrific fate. And then Lucifer spoke to open the proceedings, his booming, godlike voice filling the huge chamber with ease. Ah, our battlefield. Earth 217, ripe for the picking. I trust our preparations have been completed. Ashtaroth, Lucifer's second in command, responded without missing a beat, his voice low and raspy but full of malice. Yes, indeed, my lord. The four horsemen have been busy doing what they do best, spreading fear, misery, and hatred throughout the globe. May I? Lucifer gave his subordinate a curt nod, and the demon used his black magic to take control of the holographic globe, zooming in on each continent as he provided his quick-fire briefing. In Africa, we have multiple wars, famines, and pestilence. The conflict between NATO and Russia is heating up in Eastern Europe. The Middle East is in bloody chaos. The Chinese are preparing for their seaborne invasion of Taiwan. North Korea will soon attack their neighbors to the south. The United States is sleepwalking into civil war. The global economy has all but collapsed. The environment is rapidly deteriorating. People are scared, angry, and increasingly desperate. Good, very good. The devil replied with a sadistic glee. And what of our forces? It was Minos who answered this time, delivering his summary in a businesslike tone like he was a high-up bureaucrat. All is progressing on schedule, my lord. 20 million lost souls harvested from the 9 circles, their energy converted into balls of flame. Half are ready to fire against their assigned targets, while the other half will be held in reserve. 50 million undead pulled from the slums of Dis are standing by to advance in the first wave. 100,000 demons have been mobilized into our elite legions and deployed to the hellmouths. 500,000 harpies will descend from the skies, and 250,000 wolfmen have already entered the mortal realm to prepare the way for our invasion. Good, Lucifer replied, although not as enthusiastically as before. His invasion plans relied upon Minos' efficiency, and his ability to mobilize vast armies from the nine circles. Nevertheless, I got the distinct impression that the devil didn't fully trust Minos and regarded him as a potential rival. Last, but certainly not least, what of our naval force? The devil inquired. Leviathan answered in a soft voice, which somehow still managed to carry across the chamber to my ears. All is as it should be, my lord. The krakens are awakening from their slumber, and shall soon rise from the depths to take control of the 5 oceans. Likewise, our serpent hordes stand ready to attack ports on every coastline. Fine, fine, said Lucifer. Well, I see no reason to delay. Let us begin the first phase. Next came the moment I'd been dreading so badly, as the Lord of Hell unleashed death and destruction upon the world with a mere click of his fingers. My companions and I could only watch on in abject horror as many natural disasters occurred across the globe. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, forest fires, tsunamis, floods, hurricanes, and tornadoes, all happening simultaneously and on every continent. The purpose of these disasters was to disrupt communications and destroy infrastructure, making it much more difficult for the world's governments and militaries to coordinate an effective defense. Lucifer zoomed in on individual regions and nations so he could examine the devastation in closer detail. We bore witness to cities destroyed, forests burning, and endless columns of refugees fleeing from disaster zones. On Earth, days or even weeks had passed, but in Satan's war room, it seemed like this had all happened in mere minutes. When Lucifer was satisfied, he moved on to the next phase of the invasion. All of a sudden, we witnessed the Earth's crust opening up as vast boreholes appeared on each and every continent. 1,000 deep and black cavities, which linked the mortal world with the dreaded 9 circles of the underworld. These were the hell mouths, the means by which Lucifer's armies would launch their devastating assaults upon the peoples of Earth. And so, the groundwork had been laid. The demons had sown the seeds and mobilized the army, and Satan had opened the gateways between the worlds. Now, the responsibility fell to the 3 generals who would coordinate the military operation. I watched as Rommel, Belisarius, and Boudica came to life, assuming the role of all-powerful war machines, activated to manage a vast global conflict with clinical and brutal efficiency. Their eyes were closed, with the exception of Belisarius, who no longer had eyes. One would think that they were running the war blind, but the deceased generals all had strategic brains capable of seeing the battlefields in their mind's eye and coordinating offensives on multiple fronts simultaneously. Lucifer had granted them all this immense power, but it came at a heavy price. The military leaders knew that they had to deliver results. The devil would accept nothing less than total victory, and if his generals failed to deliver, well, there were always spare cells in the torture chambers below the ice. It's fair to say these generals were operating under intense pressure, but they showed no outward signs of anxiety or stress, as their conversation was emotionless and all business. Status reports, Rommel ordered. The German was the senior of the 3, and so the others reported to him. Our targets in the Western Europe theater are more dispersed than our reconnaissance indicated, said Boudica. We will require a 10% increase in fireball munitions to eliminate all NATO bases. Authorized, Rommel replied after only a moment's hesitation, time he no doubt used to analyze the potential impact of the request upon the overall war effort. Belisarius spoke next, saying, Our zombie hordes are taking significant losses on the North American continent. Request advanced deployment of 1 legion from the Demon Corps. Negative. Rommel replied soon after. A full legion will deplete our reserves beyond the acceptable margin of error. 5 cohorts will have to suffice. Belisarius accepted the decision without argument, his powerful brain focused upon resolving the problem. A tense silence ensued before Boudica spoke again, reporting, Pakistan has unilaterally deployed nuclear weapons earlier than our projections predicted. They have launched multiple missiles towards the Kashmir hellmouth. Rommel thought for a brief moment before delivering his next orders. Eliminate what's left of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal. Redeploy the remainder of our forces in the region through the Ganges and Persian hellmouths. Done, Boudica replied confidently. I tuned out from the conversation, instead focusing upon the terrible images appearing before me, as the devil and his demon subordinates zoomed in on the holographical globe to observe their bloodthirsty invasion in close quarters. The horrifying scenes included a pack of savage werewolves tearing through what looked like an army barracks, ripping unprepared soldiers to shreds as they emerged from their cots. Next, I saw an airbase being assaulted by dozens of flaming fireballs. The control tower was already ablaze as jet fighters were blown apart by precision strikes before they could even take off. Next came images of zombie hordes on the streets of Paris, tearing into civilians and soldiers alike in a sickening bloodbath. 60-foot-tall demons stomping across cornfields and smashing armored vehicles and tanks to pieces with their flaming swords. Winged harpies descending from blood-red skies to slaughter a line of terrified refugees. A mighty kraken pulling a destroyer down to the icy depths with its mighty tentacles, and a horde of sea serpents slithering along a concrete dock and swallowing whole any who stood in their way. And so it went on. Unfortunately, this wasn't the first time I'd seen this genocide play out. Lucifer and his legions had already launched this assault upon multiple dimensions, conquering alternate versions of the Earth and slaughtering countless millions in the process. This invasion plan was tried and tested. Each time I witnessed the bloodbath, I secretly hoped that things would turn out differently, but they never did. Surely the conclusion was inevitable. The three generals were facing challenges, but nothing they couldn't handle. Satan's forces had an overwhelming advantage over the scattered and divided armies of humanity, whose leadership would have been largely wiped out in the first attacks. Lucifer seemed pleased, but his short temper was notorious, as one of my fellow servants would soon learn in the most brutal fashion. The devil was clearly enjoying the sight of humanity being slaughtered in their millions. He always did. But Lucifer enjoyed sustenance and refreshment whilst he watched cities burn. "You slave," he suddenly cried out. "Bring me meat and mead." Thankfully, the order wasn't directed towards me, but rather the servant who stood to my left, an emaciated young man with bloodshot eyes who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I felt sympathy as I watched the kid pile up slices of cut meat upon a silver platter and filling a fine goblet with golden ale. I could see his hands shaking almost uncontrollably as he carried the food and drink across the ice-covered floor of the chamber. I'm afraid what happened next was all too predictable. The kid tripped over his own feet while still about 6 feet away from the war table, falling heavily to the floor while dropping the meat and spilling the drink on the ice. Satan's reaction to this mishap was instant and furious. "You damn fool," he spat angrily, turning his attention from the war for long enough to punish the transgression. In an instant, the terrified kid had been lifted off the ground by an unseen force, his body briefly hovering in midair before he was flung across the chamber at a tremendous speed. I could only look on as the kid's helpless body was pinned against the icy wall of the chamber. He screamed in absolute terror, but a moment later, I heard a sickening crack as Satan snapped his victim's spine like it was a twig, before allowing his paralyzed body to collapse to the ground. The crippled servant looked up at us with pain and shock in his eyes, trying to mouth a plea for help, although he was no longer able to speak or move. The kid's body was broken, but he wouldn't die. No one could in hell. But he could still feel pain, of course. Lucifer had punished his slave, and perhaps he'd restore the kid's body later if he was feeling generous. In the meantime, there was still a job to be done. "Clean up this mess and bring me what I desire," Lucifer demanded. He hadn't directed his orders to anyone specifically, but there were only 2 of us left now, and my companion was frozen in fear, seemingly unable to move from the spot. I knew it was up to me. Otherwise, we would all suffer an even worse fate. Working quickly, I scampered across the ice and collected the dropped items in my shaking hands before retreating back to the food table, piling up fresh meat and refilling the goblet. I don't know how, but I summoned the strength to serve the devil his meal. As I carefully set the plate and goblet down on the table, Satan cast me a brief glance, glaring through me with his hateful eyes before dismissing me with utter contempt. I bowed my head in submission before retreating from the war table, relieved that I hadn't been crippled or subjected to some sort of perverse torture for the devil's amusement. Meanwhile, the destruction of Earth continued as the war drew towards what seemed like an inevitable conclusion. "My lord," Rommel announced, "the world's surviving political and military leaders are discussing their final strategy." Ashtaroth interrupted at this point, speaking for the first time since the beginning of the briefing. "Our agents have been working hard, whispering our message in the ears of desperate politicians and generals. I am confident that they will decide to deploy the nuclear option. Excellent," the devil replied with a twisted grin on his lips. "You might find it crazy that Lucifer and his minions would actually want the human race to use nuclear weapons and effectively destroy the planet in the process. But in fact, this is all part of the plan. The devil doesn't care if his armies are disintegrated in atomic fires. He can always replace his foot soldiers. There's no shortage of damned souls in the 9 circles after all. Nuclear apocalypse will do nothing to stop his invasion, but it will hasten the extinction of humanity, which is the ultimate goal. Believe me when I say, Satan is quite happy to burn the whole world down just so he can rule over the ashes." I had tears in my eyes and a sickness in the pit of my stomach as I watched the missile launch sites light up across the globe, both from ICBM silos and nuclear submarines at sea. Soon, thousands of missiles rose into orbit before beginning their descent towards their targets. I lowered my head in grief, feeling sure that I was about to witness the death of yet another world. But what happened next was something I never could have anticipated. I saw flashes of white light and looked up at the globe, astonished as the missiles were plucked from the air one by one, taken out by an unidentified force before they could hit their targets and detonate. It seemed like this development took everyone by surprise, as the tension inside of the chamber nearly reached breaking point. A length pause ensued as we all watched the nuclear apocalypse being diverted, and then Lucifer reacted with predictable fury. "What the fuck is this? What have you morons done?" His tirade was aimed towards his 3 generals, their former confidence now gone as their war plan fell apart in front of their very eyes. The normally unflappable Rommel was suddenly lost for words, his jaw dropping and eyes widening in raw panic. Instead, it was left to Boudica to blurt out a response. "My lord, we have followed the protocols to the letter. There is no way we could have predicted this development." "Unacceptable," the devil screamed. "I will not tolerate failure." In an instant, Lucifer rose from his throne and raised his claw-like hands, summoning fire from thin air and shooting a stream of napalm-like flames towards the trio of hapless generals. The 3 didn't even have time to flee before the unholy fire engulfed them all, burning their undead bodies in a horrific inferno as their blood-curdling screams echoed off the chamber walls. I knew I could well be next, and so I instinctively dived for cover behind the food table. The devil missed me, but my companion wasn't so lucky. He tried to run but didn't get far. Lucifer must have seen him out of the corner of his eye, and he fired a ball of white flame which hit the servant as he ran, burning his skin and flesh in a sickening display. I remained in hiding as Satan remonstrated with his demon lieutenants. "How in hell did this happen?" he asked angrily. "I demand an explanation." Ashtaroth struggled to come up with an answer, his usually cool demeanor beginning to crack. "My lord, this is an unexpected setback to be sure, but there is no need for despair. We can regroup our forces and—" Suddenly Minos interrupted, much to his fellow demon's annoyance. "My lord, perhaps this is the scenario we previously discussed. It appears to me that heaven's forces have intervened to disrupt our invasion." Lucifer turned on his subordinate, a renewed fury in his dark eyes as he spat. "Lies! He would not dare to challenge me." Either by chance or design, the response to the devil's defiant words was instantaneous, as a thunderous roar filled the chamber, and the ice-covered ceiling above us was broken, a vast hole appearing as a bolt of lightning tore through, striking the center of the marble war table and smashing it into a million pieces. The devil roared as he stepped up from his throne and prepared for battle. But a moment later, and a second thunderous bolt struck, lighting up the dark chamber and hitting Lucifer directly, throwing him off his feet and down to the ice. I was astonished by this sudden turn of events, but the battle had only just begun. I looked up as a trio of figures engulfed in white light soared through the newly created hole in the ceiling and descended into the chamber. 3 angelic warriors, each one winged, 12 foot in height, and ferocious-looking. They landed in the center of chamber and emitted furious war cries as they drew their weapons and threw themselves into battle. At their head was a woman with long, flowing blonde hair and a sword of white flames. Behind her were 2 male angels with stern faces and wielding long war pikes with sharpened tips that lit up the darkness. The devil remained on the floor after the lightning strike. I hoped he was dead, but knew this was likely impossible, but he was unable to fight in that moment. So it was left to his demonic lieutenants to defend his inner sanctum. Ashtaroth and Leviathan soon rose from their seats and began to transform into horrifying monsters. Ashtaroth rapidly grew in size as horns emerged from his head and his teeth turned into razor-sharp fangs. A flaming sword of red fire appeared in his claw-like hands as he screamed and charged into the fight, meeting the female angel in the center of the chamber as their magical blades clashed. Meanwhile, Leviathan's arms transformed into long tentacles adorned with suckers and hooks, while his mouth became a hideous squid-like beak. He reached out with his left tentacle, taking one of the male angels by surprise, as he wrapped his appendage around the angel's vulnerable body, squeezing with immense strength and crushing his screaming victim without mercy. Leviathan attempted to repeat the trick with the third angel, but Winged Warrior was too quick, dodging the attack before thrusting his spear straight through the monster's beak. The spear penetrated deep into the demon's throat, forcing the beast to squeal in pain as he collapsed onto the ice. Minos was the last of the 3 demons, and his response to the violence was telling. He chose not to stand and fight against the angelic assault, instead fleeing to the heavy iron doors and exiting the chamber, slamming the door shut behind him. I don't know whether Minos fled due to cowardice or a lack of loyalty, but his hasty retreat from the battleground placed Hell's forces in a precarious position. Ashtaroth and the female angel fought a fierce sword battle across the chamber floor, but the ancient demon had not fought hand-to-hand for a long time, and so his opponent eventually got the better of him. The demon swung his sword and missed, burying his blade in the cold ice. As he struggled to recover, the angel cut through him with her sword, slicing through his torso and causing the beast to cry out in agony as his dark blood was spilled. Both demons were now down. They were hurt badly, but could not die, at least not here in Hell. Their broken bodies would eventually heal and regenerate, but for now they were wounded and helpless, leaving the remaining 2 angels to control the war chamber. But their advantage was short-lived, as Satan suddenly recovered consciousness and leapt to his feet, surveying his enemies with the hungry eyes of a predator as he unleashed the full extent of his powers. With a single sweep of his arm, the devil broke the surviving male angel's spear in half and flung him across the chamber, snapping his body in two and leaving his victim squirming on the floor. This left the female angel alone to face the devil's wrath. She was strong and fierce, but no match for Lucifer's dark powers. The devil's eyes lit up with a sadistic glee as he summoned all the energy in the room and fired a stream of deadly fire towards the angel. She blocked the flames with her sword, but the attack was so powerful that she was thrown off her feet. Satan's cruel grin widened as he closed in for the kill. The angelic warrior was weakened but not beaten yet. She raised her sword into the air and cried out, appealing to a higher power. "My lord, I am your vessel. Let your strength and power flow through me." The response from heaven was instantaneous, as a second later a fresh bolt of lightning, the most powerful yet, tore through the hole in the ceiling, using the angel's sword as a conductor. Her blade burned fiercely as she absorbed and made use of God's immense energy. Aiming the sword, she fired a stream of blue fire, but it was not directed at Lucifer's body but rather the ground he stood upon. The ice under his feet shattered, and Lucifer screamed as he fell into the freezing waters below. His body disappeared under the surface, and in an instant, the ice was reformed, trapping him underneath. The 12-foot angel pulled herself up from the floor, sheathing her sword and surveying the carnage around her. I hoped she wouldn't notice me cowering behind the food table, but of course she saw me, shouting out to me in a commanding, booming voice. "Come now, child. The danger has passed. Emerge from your hiding place and come speak with me." I did so, nervously walking over to the mighty, winged warrior on shaking feet. I felt sure that I would face divine punishment for my role in these events, but when I looked up into her deep blue eyes, I saw compassion and empathy, emotions I'd nearly forgotten during my time in the depths of hell. "My name is Ariel," she explained, "and I have been placed in command of God's forces in the battle to save Earth from Satan's legions." I was still confused and had so many unanswered questions. "I don't understand," I whimpered. "This invasion has already played out so many times across the dimensions. I've seen it happen on world after world, and this is the first time you people have intervened." "It is true that we've joined this battle late," Ariel answered honestly. "Humanity has brought much of this suffering upon themselves through their sinful actions. Still, my Lord will not abandon mankind in their hour of need. We have taken the fight to Lucifer's home turf and given him a bloody nose. The war will continue, of course, but the tide is turning." "Look," she pointed towards the holographic globe, now restored above the shattered and empty war table. Ariel was able to zoom in to show live scenes of the battlefields across the earth. I saw many images which cheered my aching spirit. Hordes of zombies suddenly dropping dead on city streets, fireballs exploding harmlessly in mid-air, sea serpents retreating back into the waves, and once mighty demons fleeing in terror, stomping across ravaged lands before descending back into the hell mouths. The surviving human defenders seemed astonished by this extraordinary turn of events, but soldiers and civilians soon began passionate celebrations at their unexpected victory. Few on Earth 217 would ever know how close they'd come to total annihilation. The tears I shed this time were those of joy, but there was still one important question on my mind. Ariel looked upon me with sympathy in her eyes, as if she anticipated what I was going to ask. "What will happen to me?" I whimpered. "Will you take me out of here?" Deep down, I think I knew the answer I was going to receive, but I guess it was worth a shot. However, I swore I could hear regret in Ariel's voice as she replied, "Alas, my child, this is beyond my power. You are a sinner, and there is still a price to be paid. But perhaps you can take solace in knowing that the fight back against Lucifer's evil is at hand, and nowhere is safe for him now, not even here." It did warm my heart to know that there was at least a glimmer of hope. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. My selfishness and lack of compassion for others had brought me to this place. But now I realized I was part of something much bigger than myself. "I want to help," I said confidently, whilst looking up into the mighty angel's blue eyes. "I want to play my part in this war, no matter how small it is." Ariel smiled before replying. "Very well, child. You have an important story to tell and a vital message to deliver to the mortal plane. I will permit you to do so, in the hope that this will assist our righteous cause. And so here it is, my story, for what it's worth. Many will refuse to believe my account and will not heed my warning, but I think some will realize what is coming and will make the necessary preparations, both practical and spiritual. This war is far from over, and, in the end, every Earth in the multiverse will have to face the threat of Hell's invasion. But humanity is not alone in this fight, and with Heaven's help, we can prevail. My own fate is unclear. It is highly likely that the devil will punish me for my transgressions, but he will never break my renewed spirit. And if your sinful past brings you to Hell's 9 circles, please know that you'll have at least one ally amongst the millions of lost souls. Godspeed, my friends.